Okay, so ankle loop is established. Let's talk about the shin loop. And when we talk, just as a side note, loops is just a word that John gave them. Actually, the origination of the loops came from an idea from the creator of polarity therapy. And he created something called the ovals. And this gave John the idea, and he started to recognize how the body has these sort of directions and ways to balance itself on the plumb line. So that's kind of how it all started. But the word loop is just something that he chose, and we can think of it as segments and rotations, or however you want to think of it. You can use your own terminology. So, shin loop. So as we saw, we came to the side again. Now that we have our toes up and spread, the arches are actually lifted, and this starts to move this up and grounds the heel. And this helps to move the base of the shin back, which is going in the direction of the shin loop. So the action of shin loop moves the top of the shin forward and the base of the shin back. In standing, we align the shin bones vertically over the ankles. If we do not have enough shin loop, the top of the shin moves back. So normally it moves this direction. If we don't have enough, it's going to go opposite, and we're going to have the tops of the shin moves back, and that's going to result in hyperextended knees. If we have too much shin loop, this means the knees are going to be flexed with the inability to straighten fully. So with shin loop, we want to apply muscle energy, which is the second principle, and that hugs the midline. By adding muscle energy and hugging the feet and shins towards the midline, this affects the upper thighs in the opposite direction. They actually widen. So if you come back to this way, you might be able to see it and you might be able to feel it. If you go back to your foundation, and then if you hug your feet towards each other, don't initiate it from the thighs. Initiate it just mainly from the feet below the knees, and you'll actually feel the upper thighs will widen. So the hugging action must come from the feet. If we initiate the action from the thighs or the upper legs, this causes the buttocks to clench and the pelvic floor to close, producing an entirely different opposite effect. So to practice shin loop, we activate, first we go to the base, get the ankle loop in the right direction, and then if you're standing at home and you have a mirror, side mirror, you can make sure that your shin is vertical. So it's not, the top is not too far back or not too far forward. If you're unable to do that for some reason, then that'll be addressed further along. So we get the shin vertical, and then we draw in muscle energy, feel the lower legs hug into the midline. We're not actually trying to move them, it's an isometric action, and then you'll feel the upper thighs and the pelvic floor slightly widen. You might even feel your back slightly arch. And then from there, we're going to go even further into thigh loop, which actually is now a conscious action of widening the thighs in, back, and apart. So in standing poses, we would say, move the thighs back, aligning them with this hip socket. So we go back to the side view. So shin loop goes this way, thigh loop goes the opposite way. We've often heard the cue of pulling your kneecaps up or thighs, so that's helping to move in that direction. And this helps to move the, another way of cueing it would be to move the thighs in, back, and apart, which is actually a more full action. Or just to keep it very simple, we could just say move the thighs back. For beginners, I usually just say move your thigh bones back, and then the next action, which is your tailbone, which we'll talk about next. So the action of thigh loop moves the top of the thighs back and the base of the thigh forward. In standing, the femur is vertically aligned over the shin and the ankle. If we do not have enough thigh loop, then we will have the top of the thighs too far forward, or if we have too much, the top of the thighs will be back. However, in all my years of working with people's posture, I have never seen one person who, in natural standing posture, has their thighs optimally lined over the ankles and far enough back. So everybody needs to do it to some little degree or even a large degree. So when we succumb to gravity, the thighs typically just draw forward as a natural tendency. Almost everyone's thighs are forward unless they have been consciously practicing Tadasana with thigh loop, and then they might have ingrained a new pattern into their body. So thigh loop is activated with the inner spiral. The action of the thighs has the three aspects: in, back, and apart. So we'll come back this way. So when you move the thigh bones back towards the back body, we're doing this with, it's also considered an internal rotation. So when we combine the idea of thigh loop, which means moving the top of the thighs back, and we add this rotation aspect, the inner spiral, this places the femurs optimally in the hip sockets. It creates and or deepens the lumbar curve, and it allows for greater freedom in the hips. The previous action of hugging the shins towards the midline engages the adductors, and this is important because the action of the inner spiral needs to be initiated from the adductors as the inner thigh and the inner thigh bones. So we're not trying to do it from our butt cheeks. We can say it, we can cue it, but really to be more specific and more accurate, the action has to come from the inner thighs. And so it's possible to do the inner spiral without hugging the midline first. However, when we do this action, it's less focused and more vague, and it's less therapeutic. The action of thigh loop needs to be balanced immediately with the pelvic loop, which is drawing the tailbone down. So make sure when you're cueing the actions of inner spiral that you do not have the student standing too long before cueing the counterbalancing action, the tailbone action. With inner spiral, they might feel compression in the spine. So if we move the inner thighs back, you can see how the tailbone, the back arches, and then so we quickly want to scoop the tailbone to bring that spine into balance. Yeah, as soon as possible. So let's just practice the thigh loop. So we can go from the beginning again with the ankle loop, just to start from the foundation, because we want to build them from the ground up. We lift the toes, we lift the arches, we spread the toes, we ground into the four corners of the feet. Make sure the shin bone is vertical, and then we hug in to stabilize. This tones the inner thighs, and then we use that inner thigh tone of the adductors, the inner thigh muscles, to widen thighs in, back, and apart. The thighs become lined up on the plumb line, and then we draw the tailbone down and bring the spine into neutral. So we try to do that without the thighs coming forward again. So that brings us to pelvic loop, so we'll go into more detail about pelvic loop next.